It was seen first at dawn on the 14th day of October, 1723, a black stain upon the horizon off the lee of Isla de la Vela, a skiff of canvas and timber drifting where no wind had aught to move a sail. Mariners of Port Royal and the small fishing hamlet of Loma Seca called it by many names in the weeks that followed: the derelict, the pale brig, the ship with no face. The Admiralty rolled their eyes from Whitehall. Clerks inked a terse notice in the ledger and set it aside. Yet those who drew near to the thing with lantern and rope found more than rotten planking and seaweed. The vessel answered to a single name carved deep into her stern: Nocturne, a brigantine of 2 masts, low and swift in her lines, once the pride of a Bordeaux merchant house. Her figurehead, a woman with a sea-glass eye, was split clean through as though struck by iron. The logbook they hauled aboard was mostly salt and ruin, but the first intact page bore a hand in a neat, clipped script: Eloi Martel, Master, Commission 12 May, 1717. Thereafter the entries grew thin as frost. Days without wind, nights of the sickly phosphor, mention of a cargo mislaid at Cartagena, and then only ink blots that smelled faintly of copper. Word reached the governor in Kingston, and with it the masked envoys of the Spanish crown who traveled the trading routes under the guise of merchants. They came with stern faces, with black cloaks and brass brooches given to men who must not be named. They would not speak of the Nocturne except in whispers. A ledger changed hands. A sealed chest was removed from the hold and borne into a longboat. The next dawn, the Nocturne was seen to drift again, this time towards the shoals to the west, though no hand was seen to move her till after the 4th day, when the tide pushed her into the buried teeth of a forgotten reef and snapped her on half. Those who boarded in the months that followed did not tell the whole of what they had found. They told fragmentary things: a child's smock as white as gull's wing, a half-burnt hymn, a string of tally marks carved into the bulkhead. One diver, a gaunt man named Thomas Ruiz, returned pallid and clawing at his throat. "They sleep in rows," he would say at a tavern table, and then vomit seawater for 3 nights. He was found dead 2 months later with a sea-lichen wound upon his wrist that would not close. From the reefs drifted strange detritus, a leather satchel of folded baptismal certificates, rope scorched black as though by lit candles, a mask of beaten copper in the shape of a child's smiling face. In Loma Seca, a woman named Isidora whispered of a lullaby she had once heard when the tide kept time with her breath. She spoke of a ring of children, brown-skinned, pale-faced, some with hair as white as salt, who would leave their homes before dawn, follow the sea path the currents had cut, and vanish beneath the mangrove. Her evidence was dismissed at court as the superstition of a seafaring woman, until a young magistrate, Rafael Cortez, took leave from his duties and walked the reef with a lantern of his own. Magistrate Cortez found beneath a lee of sargassum a shallow grave with bones too small to be a sailor's and a coin from Veracruz that bore the mark of the Marrow Brotherhood, a name not known to the learned men in any register. He photographed the coin with the device of his time, a painted likeness kept in his office, and sent a parchment to the Admiralty. His letter arrived with a reply that was not a reply, a summons to appear in Kingston, where the governor received him in private and bade him be silent, on pain of the Crown's displeasure. Cortez's ledger thereafter contained only a single entry in a different hand. The children were ledgered, the cargo accounted for. He vanished from the public record not long after, though fishermen say they have seen him, months hence, sitting on the steps of St. Mary's, staring seaward and humming the same lullaby. An inquisitive priest named Father Mateo took his own boat to the Nocturne's wreck one evening with 2 acolytes and a lantern. They returned with their coats full of salt and their shoes empty. Father Mateo would not speak of it publicly, save to the boy in his vestry, and even then he would only mutter, "They were not dead when we buried them." He crafted a ledger of his own, a thin book of sketches, tiny hands with the prints of rope around the wrists, a rope knot the like of which he had seen only in the fraternities of the orphan houses, a sigil of a sea in which a hand holds a child's heart. That drawing he smudged on purpose and cast into the sea when men with brass-broached cloaks pressed him to silence. Rumor clung to the Nocturne as barnacles cling to Hull. that the brigantine had been employed in a hidden operation between Cartagena and the Lesser Antilles, a cross-empire exchange arranged by clergy and merchants, in which illegitimate children, cast-off orphans, and those deemed burdensome were loaded aboard under cover of night and transported to men who sought them for strange purposes. Some said the cargo was offered to the Brotherhood in exchange for silver. Others said the Brotherhood believed that the bones of such children, when buried in the places where salt and sand kept time, granted an otherworldly mercy, a long life to those who wore their names. A strand of witnesses told another thing, that masked men had come to the orphanages months before the Nocturne's departure, with lists inked in a precise cipher. The children were taken for apprenticeship and servitude. They were taught hymns whose words were not of the church. They were given masks of copper and brass and taught to speak only when called. The last known verse of the hymn goes like this, sung low by those who remember. Sleep, little ledger, the tide keeps your score. The sea writes the names, and the names keep no more. As months passed, a pattern emerged along the coasts. Where the Nocturne had made one dark turn, a hamlet lost its children and then its laughter. Where a governor had the courage to pry, the records were found to be burned or altered. Where a diver tried to bring the truth ashore, his little journal was taken overnight and replaced by a different account. The Admiralty's indifference was now not just negligence but part of a larger machinery. A secret registry, a ledger of persons to be made void. Then came the day a band of fishermen, led by a stoic woman called Marina de los Santos, took a skiff and set a trap. They baited their nets with dried bread and baited the Hugh as if the sea itself might answer. On the 8th night their lantern caught a child's slipper floating between two tides. They hauled and found not a child, but a chest sealed with a copper band and marked with the Marrow Brotherhood's sigil. Inside lay dozens of names on slips of oiled paper, names paired with ports and dates, a shipping manifest for souls. Under one list, in a different hand, the word Nocturne was scrawled and beneath it, October 14th, delivered. Beside the manifest was a list of watchers. Names of men who had ordered the transport, governors, merchants, priests whose signatures were known to the courts. Marina took the chest to Father Mateo, who trembled and lit all his candles at once. "This proves it," he said. "This is the ledger." They would not live to see the ledger read aloud. For in the night that followed, a party of cloaked men came like shadow at the churchyard gate. Marina's skiff was found adrift the next morning, the lantern burnt to a nub, her mariner's knife embedded in the keel as if she had tried to carve her name into the sea. Father Mateo's vestry lay empty. His small ledger of sketches had been torn into shreds and scattered to the gulls. The only surviving piece of proof that remained was a single name from the manifest, a child's name in a hand both delicate and deliberate. Lucia de la Rosa, aged 7, Loma Seca, baptized 13 March, 1716. Lucia's mother, a widow called Ana, cried until her voice broke, and then she traveled to Kingston with the last of her coins. When she demanded justice of the governor, her plea was answered by a man who looked at her with eyes as cold as the water. He took her coins, gave her an oath, and then had her imprisoned for disturbing the peace. When she was released, she returned to Loma Seca and found only the tide and a child's shoe lodged in the mangrove. Years dripped like rain. The Nocturne remained broken upon her reef, becoming part of the shoal's skeleton. Tourists called her a curiosity. Clergy called her a warning. Merchants called her an inconvenience. Yet some nights, when the moon is thin and the tide withdraws to show black sand, the villagers of Loma Seca will not leave their doors. They light no lanterns. They listen. A faint hymn, half-sung and far off, is carried in the air like a scent. The fishermen say the sound comes from where the broken hull rests. The children say it comes from the reef itself, and the men who now own the sealed chests wear brooches no one can buy. I write this by candlelight in a town that forgets too quickly. I write because the ledger, a single page rescued by a diver who did not heed the men with brass brooches, lies before me. It is brittle with salt, and the ink has faded in places, but the names persist as if carved into bone. At the bottom of the page is a note in a hand I know, A. Martel. Underneath, in a stranger's scratch, "Do not let the sea keep our owing." There are tally marks beside certain names, not a count of souls, but of something else. A pattern that, when read with care, makes a shape, a knot, a rope loop, a tally that repeats every 14 names. I have walked the nocturne's deck, and I have known the hollow echo in her ribs. I have placed my ear upon her timbers and heard like a far wind the rustle of small bones. I do not claim to know why a brotherhood of men would consign children to salt and ledger and graves. I only know this: men who profit from making names vanish do not stop because they fear the law. They stop when they fear being named. And yet names were written. Names were kept. If you listen for the nocturne in the hours after midnight, you will hear a soft reckoning, a bell that should not ring beneath the water, the creak of a hatch, the muttered counting of men who think themselves absolved. If you follow that sound upon the tide, you may find a row of small shoes on the reef, each with a name scrawled inside in a child's hand. Fold them, and you fold the ledger. Burn them, and the sea remembers. I close this account here for one reason only. I have learned in my inquiries that some things are written to be closed. Some doors, once opened, do not allow the living to return intact. I have a map of the reef. I have a list of names. I have one candle left. There is a knocking beneath my study as I write, measured and patient, like the counting of a tally. I shall go now to answer it, and when I open the door, the nocturne will not have been the only thing that kept a ledger.